I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Giliberti, here with my colleague Luca Giliberti, and we're here with Emmy-winning creator of The Handmaid's Tale, the one, the only Bruce Miller. Bruce, season 4 is definitely the show at its most revolutionary and daring to date. Like, I honestly did not think it would be possible to up the ante on this thing, but here we are. How would you describe what you set out to achieve this season?
Well, I think our what we set out to achieve every season is to follow June through her story. I mean, I think that the story gets bigger and changes and gets more complicated because June gets more complicated, and the challenges she takes on for herself are bigger, and also she kind of sees the bigger picture. So I think that hooking ourselves to the character from the book, and also to Lizzie's amazing performance and the performance of the whole cast, you can actually move forward with the show into quite a complicated future, because all the characters are moving on as if they were real people. So like life, our show hopefully is cumulative. And so the characters are going through the world with all the experiences you've seen them have.
Right, and 4 seasons in, we really are finally experiencing these anticipated moments of payoff and justice. But despite some of these glimmers of hope, the series still shows the grim, brutal realities of Gilead that essentially constitute the foundation for this series. And we get to see this especially this season in the third episode, The Crossing, which you wrote. Could you talk about why it is still important to you not to shy away from depicting the show's or Gilead's nightmarish realities?
Well, Gilead's nightmarish realities are the mild nightmarish realities in our world. I think television has done a disservice to all of us by saying that problems are easy to solve and that one person can change the entire world. I think those things are nice. It's very important to talk about those exceptions, but it's more important to talk about the rule. And the rule is that when things are hard and you're in a place that victimizes you and treats you like nothing, your life is miserable. And it is not miserable. It doesn't get less miserable just because you don't want it to be miserable anymore. So I think what we had to do was push June and push the audience to actually take some of the chances that they take. So what you see is that she's moving forward, and it isn't necessarily from danger to safety. It's from danger to danger, which is a lot harder for our psyche to understand watching a TV show, but it's what we do all the time in our life. We try to make things a little better, a little safer. So she's trying to make things a little better, and all it opens her up to is really facing the bigger, complicated, huge issues in her life and that are in the world that are playing out on her little stage.
Yeah, I'm going to actually ask my follow-up question first, because it's exactly kind of what you just said. A major theme of season 4 is arguably the many facets of freedom, whether physically or psychologically. And many of these characters are living in freedom in Canada, but they still bear the weight of their internal scarring. And notwithstanding that Serena and Fred are languishing in detention, Serena appears to have has assumed a newfound inner strength and purpose, and she's no longer tied to Gilead. And Fred is undergoing this internal reckoning, trying to justify what he did as something for a cause. So a lot of this is going on where they're starting to feel a bit freer, and they seem a bit freer. But how intentional is it that you're trying to depict freedom as a thematic element this season that is very much more complicated?
I'm absolutely trying to depict that, because I think that's where we are in the world, as opposed to a few years ago when the show started. I think, we've played a lot of, if this would just change, everything would be sunshine and roses with ourselves. And a lot of those things have changed, and everything's not sunshine and roses. So I think that the feeling that I've been feeling personally is the idea of, when are things going to snap back to normal, and the growing realization that they aren't going to snap back, they're going to move forward like life does. And I think what we're trying to show on the show, and the experience we had this year writing, and actors and everybody, was that when you get the big thing that you've been shooting for, you get the big change, that's just the beginning of the work. It's not the end of it. So, a lot of people work very hard in politics to get Donald Trump out of office and to change the leadership in this country. People work very, very hard to stop the lockdown of people locked up in their houses and to get out after the pandemic. And none of those things are the be all and end all and a switch that turns on happiness or freedom. So I think also come to appreciate the freedom you do have. There's a lot of story with Rita going through that this year, is that she's learning slowly how to take on and enjoy little pieces of freedom and really use them deliciously. But she's, too much is too soon, but she's having very delectable portions of freedom that she's really enjoying. Other people like June, it's someone put a fire hose of freedom and started spraying at her, and it hurts an awful lot.
That's exactly right. And then when you think of Serena, so surprising to me that you guys decided she's pregnant. And Yvonne told us last week that Serena has fundamentally changed. The pregnancy's changed her, and Gilead and Fred are no longer her priority. And that's a huge shift for a character like that we're all supposed to love to hate. But now she's becoming a bit more humanized, if that's possible. So talk us through why you wanted Serena and Fred to move in this unexpected direction.
Well, once again, I think that I defer to Yvonne Strahovski and the other actors. I think they definitely lead us. We are in a position where we can write parts, and then we watch them perform them and see what the seams are, see what the interesting places they're exploring are. So I think that this season is a place where Serena really led us, which is someone who very much would like to do something that she doesn't have to defend all the time. She feels like she's done her best to make the world a better place, and all she does is get shit on by herself and her own moral code and everybody else's. And now she'd love to pivot to something that doesn't have much baggage, and a pregnancy, in this case, a pregnancy that wasn't through some sort of violence, is such an anomaly that she would love to pivot and leave all that behind. It's so deliciously attractive. She doesn't deserve it. Well, in my opinion, but the world doesn't work on my show. There isn't redemption for characters. There's she thinks she's going through the world in the best way she can every day, and I don't think that this is a transformation for her. I think she was presented with a choice, and she obviously said, this is the way that I go. This is the way all good people go. The problem is Serena could have gone the opposite way and convinced herself that all good people go the opposite way. I will take this baby, and with that, I will resurrect the dreams of Gilead, and I will use my baby as a symbol. She doesn't seem to be doing that, but she could certainly do that and justify it to herself. So a lot of the conflict in Serena, luckily, and because of Yvonne, is between Serena and Serena. It's between Serena Joy, the author of A Woman's Place, and Mrs. Waterford. That's the conflict. Just like the conflict in the shows between June and Offred a lot of the time. Which becomes even more apparent this season, strangely, once she leaves Offred behind and starts to miss things about her, how strong she was and how determined and patient. And so I think the ability for the characters to the ability for the actors to occupy 2 or 3 characters at the same time allows a lot of the friction to be internal. So even though you take Serena out of Gilead, you don't take any of that conflict away. She's still dealing with all of it, and a baby just makes that more complicated.
And you just mentioned June and this inner conflict. June is not your typical heroine, but she certainly embodies the effects that Gilead, as a totalitarian patriarchal theocracy, has on especially handmaids. And in this season, we really get to understand why June has made certain decisions, especially remaining in Gilead time and again. What is your response to her frequently being labeled an unlikable character? Do you believe that this word holds any weight, not only in regard to June, but when it comes to characters in general or people in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you're talking about the effect they have on the audience, what response they elicit from the audience. And that really isn't my department. That's the audience's department. I'm just trying to throw something interesting out there. And God knows how they'll respond. I respond very differently than Lizzie and all those kind of things. But I think it is not a useful word in this particular context, unlikable. But I think that June, I find June likable in a way of someone I know in my real life, as opposed to someone I know on TV. Not perfect, self-questioning, She does better in most situations than I do. And I like the fact that she's bold enough to make a decision when I don't think I'd be able to. I would just let things run their course with that because I didn't want to take responsibility, good or bad. She's very willing to take responsibility. She's incredibly stubborn, which I love, is that it's a great, adorable thing before Gilead when she's with, Luke, and it's kind of cute and flirty, and she's, whoa, it's all very, and then, she is incredibly stubborn, and it becomes one of her most defining characteristics. So I think June, I think you're absolutely right. June is an unlikable character. She's not a character. She's a woman. And as a woman, she's not likable or unlikable. She's a woman.
Exactly, and the effects, Gilead just has effects on its sufferers. It transforms these people. So it's such a strange word to use when describing this character. I would just like to briefly get into your writing process a bit. This season, you wrote 3 episodes.
Wish I had one.
But this season you wrote the first, the third, and the first episode, the third episode, and the finale. How do you decide when you, the showrunner, are going to write an episode as opposed to one of your fellow writers?
It's a good question. I usually try to take the first and the last only because they're difficult. They're not fun to write. And also there's a lot of decisions you make in the first one that you revisit in the last one. So it is the most efficient way to do it in terms of like knowing what threads I want to make sure are there in the season, because I'm in my head thinking about what threads I need at the end. Episode 3 this year, I mean, I'd like to have my staff write as many as possible. That's their job. They're very, very good at it. Most of them are better than me at it. And, I cultivate a great laziness. So I would, it's my show and it's my voice, and it has to be, guided in that way. And the first and last episodes of the year, especially on this show, are kind of even weirder than the rest of the episodes of the year, structure-wise and that kind of thing. But in terms of the other writers, my assigning of, it's funny, I was thinking about this today, I don't assign with anything except schedule in mind. I don't think, okay, Luca is much better at writing action sequences, so I'll give him the action sequence script. I don't do that. I actually don't even think about what's the script gonna end up being like. I find my writers are quite versatile. So more I'm like, well, I have a staff writer who doesn't have much experience. I should have them write early in the season so they have more people in the room to help them break the story, that kind of thing, as opposed to what it's actually ends up being about. I've found you end up with someone matched up with a character story that doesn't seem to be a good match, and they find something amazing about it. Our show is remarkable in the amount of research that we do. So oftentimes people fall in love with aspects of the story that I didn't even know existed as they do that research. The UN has helped us out quite a bit. All of this, the story about the refugees and what it's the aid, that was all researched by people. And we were told those stories by people on the ground, and the things that frustrate you and make you crazy about that story frustrate them and make them crazy. But all of those are the exact way they make those decisions. And all of those stories were told to us by people who were in those rooms deciding those things.
That's very interesting. And I've always been curious about how you manage to get into the headspace of a wide range of characters when you're writing an episode. How do you manage to keep each character distinctive, especially in regard to the dialogue, which for some characters like Aunt Lydia is just so specific on this series? So how do you keep them distinctive?
It's a good question. And I think it's a problem with a lot of beginning writers, is that they don't sound distinctive. It's something you do learn over time, but I think on our show, I think that what I do, and this is my trick I've been doing for years, is I have them make an audio version of the show, and I listen to it in the off season so I can keep their voices straight in my head. And also the difference between what I wrote and what they said, so I can write more like they talk, because some people, no matter how many times you phrase something some way, they say it another way because of where they were raised, or whatever, or how their mom said it. So you want to be able to play into those things, because those are really what make those moments work. So I do a lot of listening. I'm fairly dyslexic, so I don't read very well. I get a lot more out of listening. So when I listen to the episodes after the season, that's when I start to put my head around the voices. And I think that the key for me is don't assume you know. I mean, just because, I go back, I read, every time before I sit down and write, I go back and read a couple of scenes from each character and say, I have to remember how they sound. You watch a few episodes, you talk, it isn't magic, and it isn't done more magically on our show just because the product is more serious. It's done very straightforwardly, which is, you write, you proofread, you do research, you get in the heads of all your characters by thinking very carefully and closely, what do I have in common with this person, and what do I not have in common with this person, and who do I know who might have that in common with that person, so they can tell me what it feels like to walk through the world being 5'1" or whatever. Whatever difference it happens to be, it's someone from another planet or someone, from another country. It doesn't really matter. You still have to find some way to get into that head. But the voice, I really find that by listening, I can really get and having so many years on the show, their voices do change. You want to make sure you're writing to them now, not them a few years ago. And as you said, I think this season, I'm incredibly proud of what we were able to do during COVID on this season. I mean, we had to rewrite all the scripts, reduce all the scale of everything on the fly. We were in the middle of making the show. The entire crew was, half the people were working, all of that stuff. And we were still able to kind of make a tight, piece of television that, worked one thing after another. And, being that flexible required kind of writers who were not just automatons, but writers who knew how to kind of, like you said, knew how to do their own research and find the voices on their own, because we were rewriting stuff left and right. And in fact, a lot of the stories which we had loved to go deeper on, we were unable to because the actors weren't available to us. We had, Zoe Ashton, who's incredible, and Samira. We had 4 or 5 other pieces of that story which we were just simply unable to do because Zoe was in England and couldn't get to us for very long. So everybody moved heaven and earth, but you do look at the season and feel like you've compromised the voice of some characters just because of math, in COVID. How can you get someone through quarantine and on set and, all those kind of damn time-space continuum.
Yeah. It's amazing that you guys were able to achieve what you did, because the production was shut down very quickly after, I think, 2 weeks or something. And then which would have been really heartbreaking. And then you all came back under very strict guidelines and you were able to put this season together. So, I mean, congrats to that. I'd like to lean into something that you said earlier, and that is about January 6th and Trump. And the reason why I bring it up is because when the show premiered, I think it had even more of an impact because it was around the time that the Trump administration had started. And we all thought at some point naively, when Trump goes away, everything else goes away. And it doesn't snap back. It's probably worse because we now have sustained attacks on truth. Reproductive rights are under attack all over the country. Like Texas, that happened yesterday, I think, or the day before. People are saying praise be and under his eye in protest. They use your show and Margaret Atwood's words against them. And the corruption of power, especially, is happening in broad daylight. It's not happening behind a curtain. And I just am amazed at how we are so close to Gilead. We're a few steps away. And this show is so viscerally effective on that level to me. And I'm wondering how it affects you personally.
Well, it's not nice when your job is to imagine the worst thing that can happen, and then it kind of does. You'd much rather, when you're sitting there imagining the worst thing that can happen, think this will never happen. So that's very troubling. I mean, it's awful, is what it is. Any of the things that I read when I read the book in college, I was certainly, not only are you hoping and believing never will happen, you also believe that everybody in the world, if they read this book, could understand that this is a place we don't want to be. I mean, we may have differences, but this is a place. And the number of things in The Handmaid's Tale that Margaret Atwood presaged and that we've seen come to fruition one way or another is horrible, and it reduces my faith. And that's the biggest thing that happens, is that I think I underestimate how awful some people can act and can be, especially when they're scared, but that's no excuse. And I think if people are, pointing the finger at June Osborne for her moral decisions under incredible extremists, they should look a little more at their moral decisions from their living room that are not, that are much easier to make and harder to stand behind. June is just doing a very extreme version of a lot of the discussions we're having now. But I think mostly I'd like to be writing on a show that's completely irrelevant. I would like to write this show, but people go, that would never. It's crazy. It's beautiful, but it's crazy talk. So I'd like to do a really beautiful, well-observed, incredibly well-acted and well-written television show that people think is complete fiction. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. And if the show pushes us any closer to that, that's good. If it pushes us into the show being irrelevant, I think that's good by showing these things out loud. So I think for me, it's always a double-edged sword. It's the stuff you guys said in this interview with just it's lovely to hear people who are affected by the show that they feel things. I wish I could make them feel a little more that was good and a little less that was bad, but that's June's journey at this stage. And I think it makes the little victories that she does get, even some of the huge victories that she gets this season, even sweeter than they would have been before. Even sweeter, I think that the tiny little victories you really learn. And I think it's a post-pandemic thing. I mean, going out for a cup of coffee is lovely. And it does feel like a big victory. And I think, kind of appreciating the little things is a story. I know you guys probably haven't seen very far ahead, but moving forward in the season, every time Lizzie gets to walk out her front door, it's an amazing moment. Every time June gets to walk out.
That's right. And this show, there's nothing like it on TV, and we've really enjoyed the journey so far. We look forward to seeing the finale soon. Bruce, thanks for your time today. Congratulations on a really strong season.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.